Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Facebook Live program organized by Bumrungrad International Hospital. My name is Dr. Nyominko, otherwise known as Dr. Mike from Medical Coordination Office of Bumrungrad International Hospital. In our program today, I'm going to be your moderator and interviewer for this Facebook Live program. The topic that we're going to be discussing today is the power of your genes preventing a broken heart. Sounds interesting, right? So for this very interesting topic, we are honored to have Assistant Professor Dr. Polakit, who is specialized in cardiovascular genetics. Dr. Polakit received his medical degree from Chulalongkorn Hospital in Thailand in 2003, and then he got fellowships in the United States. Firstly, he got a fellowship in medical genetics in the field of clinical molecular genetics at Harvard University in the United States. Secondly, he got another fellowship in the field of cardiovascular disease at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine in Pennsylvania, United States. So his clinical interest is in cardiovascular genetics. So today we're going to be hearing a lot about the genetics relating to cardiovascular genetics. So good afternoon, Dr. Polakit. Thanks for joining us today. Firstly, before we start off, let me ask you a question. There are actually many specialties and subspecialties in medicine. Why cardiovascular genetics?
Oh, very good question, Dr. Mike. And actually, good afternoon, Dr. Mike, and all the audience on the Facebook Live. The topic today is very interesting, so thanks for inviting me. And I would like this session to be quite informal. We are talking about genes. It's going to be very scientific, so let's make it less serious. The way that I became interested in cardiovascular genetics or heart disease or even a genetic disease or familial disease, or whatever terms that people have said, really began when I was in medical school. And because my father and many people in my family died from heart attack. And some of them had a disease of the heart muscle. It was not a good news when I heard about all these diseases during that time. So it really aroused my curiosity to know more about the genetics and also heart disease. I think that's really the beginning of my long journey in this field.
That drives you to do the further study in cardiovascular genetics because of the very strong family history of heart disease. That's been very interesting.
Thank you.
Okay, so shall we start our discussion today? Firstly, let me ask you, what is genomics and how is it significant to the health of everybody?
Oh, you asked a very good question, Dr. Mike. I would like to maybe bring on the first slide that I prepared so we can discuss a little bit more about genome or genes. So people may have heard of many terms in this field, right? Genome, genomics, gene, DNA. But what are these terms exactly, right? So let's start with a very simple term, genes. So a gene is a set of the DNA segment that contains information of the production of the biomolecules, mostly protein. So all these information that we have in the genes are packed in the long strand of the DNAs, and DNA is packed in the chromosome, as you could see very easily on this slide. So once we have this information, the doctors, especially people who have interest in genetics, can learn a lot more about the information and then can apply into the clinical care. Believe it or not that when we look very carefully in our chromosome, DNAs, or even all the genes, 99.8% are identical to that of every other human beings. But there's about maybe 0.2% variation. But that 0.2 variation is very important and has interested us very much in healthcare. We try to understand the genes by using the advanced technology called sequencing machine. And nowadays we can sequence and we can learn all the genetic code very easily and in very, very fast way. So once we know all this information, and we pay particular attention on the genetic variation. And maybe sometime we look at the other part of the genes or the chromosome or the DNAs. So all this information really help us because we compare it from person to another person. And we use many other technologies to sort of clarify if that genetic variation has any profound impact to our health. It really helps us in terms of the disease diagnosis, prevention, and also treatment.
sounds interesting. So you're trying to say that that particular 0.2% of genome variation can tell you a lot about your future health, right?
Exactly. So let's go back to your first question, right? What is genome? So now we know the meaning of the gene or a gene, but the genome is a set of the whole genes, maybe in one cell. I would like to bring on the second slide. So I'm gonna show you. Oops, sorry. So let's focus on this slide. As you can see that. A genome is one whole set of all your genes in DNA, and maybe including non-gene DNA part. Everything is packed together in one cell. And in our human body, most of the cells would have a chromosome, DNA, and genes. And there are approximately 20,000 genes in your genome. And that's why we really pay attention on genome as a whole, because we believe that if we understand more about the interaction between genes in the genome, or maybe interaction between genes and environmental factors, it would help us understand more the disease mechanisms, and also the way that we can use to prevent or to treat or even to diagnose the certain diseases. Especially for me as a cardiologist, I pay particular attention on the heart diseases. If you look at this slide, in chromosome, as I told you previously, that there are DNAs, and DNA stretch can be very long. Dr. Mike, do you know how long the DNA is stretched? If you just stretch it out? Sorry. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. It's about 2 meters long. It's very long.
It's very long, actually.
Yes.
It's like the distance for our social distancing, right?
Yes, or maybe even longer. Yes, exactly. So let's go back to the slide one for a while. All right. So the DNA is basically comprised of all the genetic codes. So in science, we tend to make things simple, right? We don't want to make things very complicated. So the DNA is comprised of all genetics code. So we name it ACTG. So 4 different chemicals or bases. And all these combinations, when we put together, it can really code for the protein. And protein can function, can form the organs. And if there's a genetic variation, it means that there's a problem or typo of all of these codes, or maybe some, or maybe just only one, a single code. It can cause a lot of problem. It may or it may not cause problem, but sometimes when it causes problem, it can be very serious. If you look on the slide, so the scientists or cardiologists or even geneticists, so we really look carefully when we look at the sequencing data, all of this genetic code. I can make it more simple by using the comparison. If you look at the whole cell, or maybe the whole genome, that can be a textbook. And if you look at your a chromosome, it can be a chapter. So you have many chromosomes, you have many chapters in the book. Within each chapter, when you read it, you read through many sentences, right? So each sentence can represent the DNA or maybe genes. So if you have some typos, and that can be a genetic variation. Sometimes it causes problems, sometimes it may not cause problems. And the one that can cause problem, it's really important for us to understand it. Yes. So that's the whole reasons why I became interested in the field of genetics and also genomics.
Okay, that's very interesting to know about the genome, because I'm sure many people are familiar with the term gene, but in terms of the terminology called genome, I think not many people are aware of it. So it's a very good explanation about genomes and very detailed explanation. Thank you for your interesting explanation. So shall we move on to another question? You are specialized in cardiology, especially cardiovascular genetics. So to prevent certain heart diseases, what is the role of genetic testing?
You actually asked a very good question again. We as cardiologists, sometimes we tend to use many procedures, many medications, hopefully diagnose or treat patients or even prevent the disease sometimes. So compared to other specialties, some people may say that a cardiologist could be a bit slow in using the new technologies, new genetics technologies, and incorporate it in clinical care. But we are catching up very well, actually. As a cardiologist, I try to find a way to sort of early prevent the disease, or maybe confirm or identify the disease. And genetic testing is a medical test that can actually help you We use genetic as a medical test basically to identify the genetic variation of some people call mutation that can cause the heart disease or heart conditions.
Yeah.
And also genetic tests can also help you identify or determine, I would say determine, the risk of developing heart diseases. Usually we focus on inherited heart disease or familial heart diseases. Those are diseases that could be transmitted from one generation to another generation.
Okay.
And I think most of cardiovascular or heart diseases nowadays, we use genetic testing to sort of help in terms of identification, diagnosis, and also risk stratification as well.
So what are the heart conditions that can be determined by genetic testing? Like how many genes need to be tested?
Okay, so maybe we can show the audience the slide. Okay, so I tend to make things simple, as I told you, Dr. Mike.
Yep.
Let's put together the cardiovascular diseases or heart diseases into 3 groups. In fact, there are many, many groups, right?
Yeah.
But when we make things simple, it's very easy to understand the notion or the concept of heart disease. So if you look at the picture on the left, you can see the heart attack. So once you have some problem with the circulation or the artery or the blood supply in the heart, it can cause a narrowing of the circulation.
Yep.
And that's why people can come with heart attack if they lack blood supply or the circulation is disrupted. If you look at the middle figure, there's a cardiac arrest. So if you have the electrical system problem in your heart, it can disrupt the electrical supply. And as a result, sometimes it can cause some mild problems, sometimes it can cause some serious problem. But most importantly and most significantly, it can cause sudden cardiac death or cardiac arrest, and we don't want that.
Okay.
If you look at the picture on the right, that is heart failure. So if you have the problem in your house, you can have the plumbing system, as you can see in the heart attack. If you have the problem with the electrical system in your house, you can have cardiac arrest. And if you have the problem with the pumping function in your house, I try to make a comparison. The whole heart is like your house.
Yeah.
So if the pumping function is bad, then you can cause heart failure because heart muscle cannot pump properly.
Yeah.
Or sometimes even for some people, it can pump too much, and it can also cause problem as well.
Yeah.
And you know, all these 3 conditions can be maybe associated with the genetics or maybe genetic variation that you carry. Some other heart conditions could be related to high cholesterol, high fat, or sometimes it can be associated with the big blood vessel supply connected to the heart. Some people call it, the scientific word is aorta. It can be enlarged and dissect. And all these can be associated with genetic variation or genetic mutation that we are talking about.
That's very interesting to know. So genetic has a very crucial role in developing, those kind of heart diseases. So
Certainly.
if we can find out those variations earlier, then we can prevent those heart diseases.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Prevention, diagnosis, and also treatment, maybe.
Yeah. So another question is, so after we have done the testing, we're gonna get the result or the report of the genetic testing, right? Then how can we interpret, can the report say oh, you have a very high risk of developing cardiac diseases, or you have very low risk of cardiac diseases, how can we interpret the report?
So in the world of genetic testing, it depends on the types of the genetic testing.
Yeah.
Some tests can give you, like the level of the confidence, like high risk, low risk, depending on certain conditions. But today we are focusing on heart, so I'm going to talk about the genetic testing in heart disease, especially inherited or familial heart diseases.
Yeah.
So we tend to break down genetic testing result into 3 categories.
Yeah.
But as you know, that genetic testing can be very complex and challenging to interpret. The process of doing genetic testing, it's simple, but the interpretation and the process of the counseling can be very challenging.
Yeah.
And I think I strongly recommend everyone who wants to do genetic testing in heart disease, seek medical attention, talk to the provider, maybe heart doctor, maybe genetics doctor, or maybe the persons who have expertise in heart genetics.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the possible genetic results when you do the testing. As I said, 3 categories, right?
Yeah.
First one is the positive result. So if you have positive result, it means that the doctor or the laboratory geneticist identified the genetic variation that based on the current knowledge, we know is associated
The
with the
variation
disease.
in that 0.2% of
Yes.
genome, right?
Yes, yes, mostly.
Uh-huh.
And also, when we see this genetic variation that is disease-causing, we call pathogenic or sometimes call likely pathogenic in a very scientific way. But let's make it simple. It's positive.
Yep.
So once it's positive, then you need to sit down and talk to the provider, like heart doctor or the genetics doctor. What are we going to do next? We have a variety of options.
Yeah.
If you do not have the disease or the clinical symptoms, maybe we can plan the very good way to do surveillance. Maybe that particular person may need to undergo echocardiogram every year for some disease, heart ultrasound. Also, some people may need a yearly follow-up with the electrocardiogram or some other further testing. If you do have the disease or clinical symptoms, but sometimes we decide to do genetic testing because we're not really sure the diagnosis. So genetic testing can also confirm the diagnosis.
Yeah.
Can exclude or rule out a suspected diagnosis. So if you have the positive result, it can sort of pin down or define the diagnosis for you. And the doctor can find the right treatment for you. The next thing is that if you have the negative result, right? So some people may say it's a peace of mind. It's sort of a peace of mind, but I have to remind audience and also everyone that when you have the negative result, it doesn't mean that the risk is going to be 0 for you in terms of the disease development. But it means that the current knowledge has already said that you do not have any genetic variation that can be associated with the disease, a particular disease that we tested. Yes, but you may be at risk from of developing some other heart diseases. We just try to tell the patients very frankly that we use genetic testing. It's very helpful, but at the same time, there's the limitations, pros and cons that we need to sit down and discuss. So the third category is most challenging because it's something called uncertain significance. The genetics lab, the doctors, when we interpret the data, it's not only that we see positive and negative results. Sometimes we see some variation that we're not really sure. It can be in one basket called uncertain significance.
Okay.
But what I would like to tell everyone is that once you have this genetic testing, if it's uncertain significance, we can just keep in mind that the laboratory and the doctors will go back to analyze the data on a regular basis, maybe every year, every 2 years. And if we think that we have more data and sufficient evidence to promote or even demote or downgrade the category, we will make contact. So that's why having genetic testing and counseling, it can be a very challenging and the information and also relationship that you have to sort of establish and gain in the clinic with the heart doctor or genetics doctor is very important because this can be a little longer than just one-time visit or two-time visit.
The answer from the testing is not like straightforward, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
There might be some other people who could do genetic testing out there, but I do recommend that if you have a family history or you have personal history of heart disease, come to the clinic or have a telephone consultation with a specialist who can help you navigate through all these genetic testing, not just for heart disease, but in every disease.
Yeah. And you said earlier that if you have a negative result from the genetic testing, even if you have a negative result, you can't be sure that you have 0 chance of developing disease. So what does it mean? I mean, like, there can be you don't have any variation of your genome at this point, but can there be variation in the later stage of your life?
You also asked a very good question. again. Once you have genetic variation, it's true that sometimes with some other factors, like, for example, chemical substance, food, it can have insult.
Factors,
Yes, it can have insult to your DNA, and it can cause mutation. But normally, once we make sure that you don't carry the disease-causing mutation or genetic variation in a catalog and a battery of the genes that we do test, what we tend to tell the patient is that we do have a set of the genes we want to test on you based on current knowledge. This is the best information we have. It may not give you 100% risk-free, but at least we know that the current technology and also the knowledge has really identified no mutation in particular disease, especially we talk about heart disease today. So basically, it can tell you that, well, you don't have the disease-causing mutations for the inherited heart diseases. But in the future, there might be some chance that you get some other non-genetic insult, and you can develop the genetic mutation in your body. And in the scientific term, we call somatic variation or somatic mutation.
I see. Okay. Thanks. I think there are some people watching our live, and I'm not sure whether there are some questions from the audience. So
all right, yeah,
let me go through the questions from the audience. Okay, so so if you are watching this live Facebook Live, and if you have questions about cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular genetic, please feel free to ask questions in the comments so we can answer your questions real life. Okay. This question is from Mosia. How is broken heart syndrome diagnosed as genetic?
Very interesting question. Actually, Dr. Mike, before we started the question,
we'll talk about
that's Dr. Mike's question.
Yeah.
I try to make things, catchy. And when we talk about the heart disease, people tend to think about, heart failure, a broken heart, heart is not functioning properly. Genetic testing can also help identify or, give you the diagnosis on the disease called cardiomyopathy. It means the disease of the heart muscles. Sometimes when you have the mutation or genetic variation in the cells in your heart, it can encode a abnormal protein, and it can cause malfunction of your heart muscles. So as a result, your heart may pump, as I say, in a very, very efficient way, maybe too much. And there's a compensatory mechanisms. So heart is going to be very, very thick, keep thicken and thicken. So in medical term, we call hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So heart is too thick, and it really affects the contraction of the heart and the function. So toward the end of the day, it can cause heart failure. On the other hand, if you have the genetic variation or the mutation on the different parts of the DNAs that encode the heart muscles, sometimes it is not going to cause heart to be thickened, but it can cause heart to be too thin or dilated. In the medical term, we call dilated cardiomyopathy. So again, toward the end of the pathway, the patient is going to succumb to heart failure and sometimes to death. And that's what sometimes we call, in a very, in a very informal way, like a broken heart syndrome.
Because when you talk about broken heart, then what comes to the mind of the people is like, am I having a relationship problem? Like
I see. Emotionally, right? But it's not always wrong, because once you have serious heart disease, it can really impact your emotion very tremendously. Right. So the bottom line is that sometimes when you have genetic mutation or genetic variation running in your family, it can cause a problem to heart muscle, and it can cause problem to heart failure. And that's why we always sort of have some joke among our cardiologists or heart doctors like us, well, you have broken heart. Yes. I think the power is really empowering. The knowledge is really empowering right nowadays. So we really learn a lot more about genes. So that's why I really encourage people to sort of pay more attention and then understand more about how genes really affect you, especially for heart disease.
So I hope this answers your question. Okay, let me take the question from another audience. What does stress cardiomyopathy feel like?
Stress cardiomyopathy?
Yeah.
This is a very good question as well. A lot of people talk about broken heart, right? Or broken heart syndrome or something like that.
Yeah.
So in medical term, we call stress-induced cardiomyopathy.
Yeah.
We also have another term called Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. It's more like a Japanese term. We believe that if you have stress...
Oh, yeah, there is a question about Takotsubo. Is Takotsubo syndrome genetic?
Yeah. So maybe I try to answer the first question and we go back to the Takotsubo or stress-induced cardiomyopathy. So stress-induced cardiomyopathy or Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, we think that it happens when you have the high stress in your body and it sort of disrupts the hormonal axis in your body as a result. So your heart goes into a failure.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can cause a dilation of certain part of the heart.
Yeah.
We don't think that there's any genetic etiology has been confirmed so far.
Yeah.
So stress-induced cardiomyopathy or Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, for this particular cardiomyopathy, the way that we do the treatment is to make sure that you don't have any other underlying problems. And we tend to use the medication and we follow up the patients for a while and with the imaging, echocardiogram. And most of the time, or maybe sometimes, heart will recover in a decent time frames. There might be some people who have stress cardiomyopathy and do not recover. But don't worry, because we have a lot of things in our toolkit box to help the patients.
Okay.
So to answer the second question, is it genetics or not? We do not have definite answer if this is genetics. But as far as we know so far, there's no genetic etiology identified clearly for stress-induced cardiomyopathy.
I see. Okay. Thanks for your answer. I think it's clear for you now. Okay, let me take another question from Siwakon. If my mother has breast cancer, will I have the risk of only for breast cancer?
Well, if your mother has breast cancer, we have to really look very carefully in the whole family history. I would really recommend that you meet geneticists or oncologists. Sometimes we work together as a transdisciplinary team or clinic. The way that we do it here, especially at Bumrungrad hospitals, we will take a very long history. It might be boring, but it's very helpful. We will draw a family tree. We will ask you if you have any other people in the family with breast cancer or only your mother. And it depends on the age of onset for your mother. So if you think that there might be some genetic component or possibility to be a genetic breast cancer, we can do some genetic testing for that person.
Okay. So there's another question from Arif. He is asking a question relating to AHQ, Alternative Hospital Quarantine. If the patient is in quarantine at Bumrungrad International Hospital, is the genetic test possible to do?
Genetic testing is possible to do it under ASQ, yes. But what I do recommend is to have the initial consultation. Maybe we can talk about the reason why Arif, right, would like to consider genetic testing. Maybe there might be particular concern that he would like to discuss with the doctors at Bumrungrad Hospital. And if we think that genetic testing is worthwhile doing, yes, we can provide genetic testing. We may not even need to do it under the ASQ condition because normally it will take only 2 weeks for the ASQ. So we can have initial consultation first and then we can have another visit in the clinic. Nowadays, it's very convenient, especially from Bumrungrad Hospital standpoint. We try to make everyone very comfortable with our care and the way that we deliver the service. We can do genetic testing by many means, not just only blood drawing. We can do saliva or cheek swab, or we can even send the box and the consent form to the house or to the hotel room.
Okay, so let me add a little bit on the answer of Dr. Polakit. If you are in AHQ, Alternative Hospital Quarantine, let's say you are in quarantine for 14 days, and if you want to do some testing, what we can do is like a doctor can give you consultation by telemedicine. So you don't have to go and see the doctor in his clinic, but we will bring an iPad to your quarantine room, and the doctor can talk to you via the telemedicine or teleconsultation so that you can get advice from the doctor, and then doctor can order some blood test or whatever test that is appropriate during quarantine. So you can actually start the treatment before you get out of quarantine. So please do not worry about that. We can talk about this, okay, if you need anything during quarantine period. So let's take another question.
Certainly.
Okay, there are actually so many. Amar said it's my favorite hospital. Thank you so much. Thanks for the compliment.
Thank you.
We really love to hear that.
It's our favorite hospital, most favorite hospital.
It's my favorite hospital too. Like whenever I have sickness, my family has sickness, I always bring them here.
Yes.
This is the best hospital. I can say that. Okay. Okay. Let's wait for some more questions, and we can move on with our interview questions.
Yeah, let's do it.
So the next question that I want to ask you is like, we do the genetic testing, right? And then we can get the report. Then the report can tell you whether you have a high risk or low risk of developing certain disease, right? Can the report also guide you to get a proper treatment plan?
Yes. Here at Bumrungrad Hospital, we try to make things more comprehensive, as I said, right? And also very easy for the patients. When you receive the genetic testing report, it will tell you if you have positive, negative, or uncertain significance sometimes. More than that, it will tell you the instructions, what you should do next with the genetic result. But I think more importantly here, we really want you to have a very good care. And that's why, as part of the genetic testing, we want you to meet the doctors, because doctors can have a face-to-face discussion, maybe telemedicine consultation if you prefer, depending on the situation, like what you just mentioned for the ASQ. Yeah, but the bottom line is I would like to say that we also provide the further instructions, because what we don't like is to leave the patients in the middle of nowhere after the patient received the genetic testing result. But I may not be able to tell you everything about the plans, because it depends on the clinical context.
Thank you so much. Okay, so can you tell us detail about the process of genetic testing?
Definitely, Dr. Mike. As I said before, previously, genetic testing and consultation can be challenging. Personally, I think the most challenging part is the interpretation and also the counseling, talking to the patients and walk them through all the knowledge and the findings and the next step, what we should do. But the easy part is about the processes of the testing by itself. If the patient is agreeable to proceed with genetic testing, we can have them sign the consent, and also we can collect the blood or saliva, depending on the preference. With the current technologies, we can extract and use the DNA from the saliva very easily. Once we have your blood, maybe we have phlebotomist to take your blood, or we collect the saliva. Then we can get the DNA. The DNA will be analyzed very carefully in the state-of-the-art laboratory using the next generation sequencing machine. And after that, geneticists and the laboratory scientists will work together and go through all the details of your gene of interest very carefully, meticulously. And that's why it takes 2 to 3 weeks for all of this process to generate the report and to be able to talk to the patient about the final result. So as I said, I think the process of the DNA collection or the analyzing by itself are quite straightforward, at least from the patient standpoint. The interpretation and also the counseling can be challenging. And that's why, again, I really encourage or recommend that you meet or you have an initial consultation with the experts in the field.
That's right. Okay. And when we do the genetic testing, is it like a one-time testing, or how often should we do it?
In general, when we talk about genetic testing, it can be one time, it can be several times, multiple times. But mostly, especially in cardiovascular disease or heart disease, it's only one time in your life. Yes. If you do genetic testing with a set of the genes or the collection of the genes that we offer, It's only one time, and you don't have to repeat it again.
Okay. How about the minimum age for the suitable for the genetic testing?
Most of cardiovascular disease or heart disease are adult onset. So I do recommend that you reach 18 years of age before we talk about genetic testing.
Okay.
However, depending on clinical context or some heart disease, we may be able to offer genetic testing for minors or individuals or patients who are younger than 18 of age.
Yeah.
But I think it has to be case by case.
I see. Okay. So generally, you recommend the age of 18, to do that.
Yes.
Shall we go back to the audience?
Sure.
Whether they have some more questions. Okay, another question is from Moshiwa. Which risk factors are for coronary artery disease? Is it genetic? Coronary artery disease, is it genetic disease?
So when we talk about coronary artery disease or atherosclerosis, we're talking about the circulation problem, right?
Yeah.
As I mentioned on the slide before, that you have maybe some problems, some plaques, deposition in the circulation system to the heart, and it can cause lack of blood supply.
Yeah.
And finally, it can cause coronary artery disease or atherosclerosis.
Yeah.
We believe that based on our current knowledge, this is multifactorial.
Yeah.
Of course, there's also some genetic component. People do see a lot of the patients who have coronary artery disease together the family history of heart disease. But it's not only genetic factor or genetic components, since it's multifactorial.
Yeah.
If you do have some other factors, for example, diabetes, high blood sugar, high fat, high cholesterol, you can also have increased risk for coronary artery disease.
Yeah.
But we do have the way to calculate the risk, even for lifetime risk or 10-year risk for developing the coronary artery disease or atherosclerosis.
Yeah.
We use the age. We may ask you if you smoke. We may ask you if you're on certain medication. We will ask you what is the level of your cholesterol. And in the future, we may be able to use the genetic data and incorporate it into the formula, and we plug in all the number and data. We will be able to tell you if you're at risk of developing heart attack or heart disease, particularly coronary artery disease in the future. There may be some other the laboratories or the researchers somewhere in the world are doing this. But at Bumrungrad, we are in the process of developing this comprehensive risk stratification and risk prediction for heart attack or coronary artery disease. But if you ask me if this is genetics or not, partly genetics, partly not genetics.
Yeah. Because many of us know that the coronary artery diseases are caused by mainly by the lifestyle factors, like diet. If you have very high cholesterol, and that's likely to have coronary artery disease, right? But even high cholesterol, sometimes one of my friends just got diagnosed with the very high cholesterol. But he's like kind of athletic, and he eats a very healthy, and he is thin, he's not fat at all. But I think it's because of genetic, even though he eats a very healthy and his lifestyle is very good, but he has very high cholesterol. So high cholesterol can be also a genetic factor, right?
Yeah, you actually pointed out a very good, a topic. And actually, I mentioned a little bit before when we talk about the cardiovascular diseases, putting together, all these three groups, right? And I mentioned that sometimes patients can have high fat, high cholesterol, and it can be genetics, which is true. Some people, and maybe 1 in 200 in general population, can have genes that can cause high cholesterol, hypercholesterolemia in the medical term. And if you have high cholesterol, of course, you're at risk of developing the coronary artery disease. So, for example, when you mention about your friends who is very athletic, seems like a very healthy guy from outside. Who knows? He may carry a gene that can predispose him to developing high cholesterol and potentially having coronary artery disease in the future. But the genetic testing, especially that we offer here at our hospital, also include the genes that can tell you if you have familial hypercholesterolemia. or familial high fat. And if we do see the gene, the genetic variation or genetic mutation, we can plan very well. What kind of medications are we going to use? What kind of preventive measures or interventions we can use? Because sometimes only just the oral medication might not be enough to bring down your bad cholesterol to the safe zone. That's what I would say.
I see.
And there are a lot of studies out there that we try to look at the genetic profile and compare to your lifestyle, especially in coronary artery disease. Sometimes you may be born with a very bad genetic profile or genes, but if you do have good lifestyle and good diet, healthy diet, your risk might be comparable to the persons who may have very good genes but unhealthy diet.
That's right.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. So let me take one more question from the audience, and then we will move on to conclusion because we are running out of time now. So the last question that I'm going to take from the audience is from Tricia. How is the test done, and how long does it take for getting the result? Or how is the test done? That we already explained about this earlier, so I think we can skip this question. But doctor can explain you like how long do we have to wait, to get the test result? Like, normally, how long does it take?
Yes. In general, it will take about 2 to 3 weeks.
2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm very impatient myself, but I have to stress the importance of having good genetic testing process. And that's why we pay very, very much attention in terms of the process and the genetic testings. So DNA has to go through advanced sequencing machine, and we do use a very like a good people and experts, even in the laboratory, to go through all this process and analyze the genetic profiles. And the doctors, geneticists, or even laboratory technicians, we have to work together and make sure that there's no problems. It will go through rigorous process of the quality control and assurance. And that's why it takes 2 to 3 weeks to get the final result.
So you have to be patient to get the result.
Yes, but it's not that bad. 2 to 3 weeks. I think it's in a very decent time frame. And after we get the result, we will meet you again, and so we can go through the result very carefully together. So we work as a team here at Bumrungrad Hospital, and together with the patient as well.
And in conclusion, I heard that we have the Preventive Genomic Center in Bumrungrad International, right?
Yes.
And I heard that this is the very first genomic center in Asia, throughout Asia. So no other Asian country has this kind of center or service. So can you tell us more about this center?
Yes, I think the concept of having preventive genomics is like having a preventive medicine program, right? I'm sure that many other places in the world have initiated this program, maybe not in the exact term like what we have here. But you're right, I think preventive genomics clinic at Bumrungrad Hospital is one of the kind, and perhaps the only one in Asia right now. There might be some other centers in the Western countries. As a cardiologist, at Heart Center and also geneticist at Preventive Genomics Clinic. I'm quite proud of having this clinic at Bumrungrad Hospital. What really set us apart from other clinics is that we really give a dedication to specialized tertiary care here. And we think that genetics and genomics is really growing rapidly. We try to use evidence-based medicine and patient-centric approach, hopefully to customize and personalize the care for the patients. And that's why we pay much more attention on the scientific literature and also the research in biomedical field here at Bumrungrad Hospital.
So how many doctors do we have in our Preventive Genomics Center?
So right now there's only one full-time staff, which is me, and maybe 3 or 4 staff who have a different expertise from the genetic standpoint. But all of us here, 4 to 5 geneticists, can be available all the time for the consultation, face-to-face, or even the telemedicine consultations. So if you ask me how many people in our team, I think it will be up to 10 people, 4 to 5 doctors, 1 or 2 genetic nurses, and the rest are the ancillary supporting staff who have been well trained and certified.
So if you are interested in our preventive genomics center, and if you want to do genetic testing for cardiovascular diseases, and you are welcome to Bumrungrad International Hospital and have a consultation with Dr. Polakit and other specialists as well. But in this COVID time, if you are unable to come to Thailand, we can offer you a telemedicine service so that you can have consultation with our specialists via teleconsultation from your home country. So when you are able to come, you can come here for more testing and more solutions for your health problems. So we thank you all for watching us today, and we wish that you all are safe from this COVID pandemic, and we hope to see you again in Thailand soon. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Polakit.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here.